Peter, I think the best thing, rather than me trying to introduce you and probably fluffing that up, why don't you just give us a flavour for who you are, what you do, and then I've got a few questions for you.
Okay. Well, years ago, I ran my own accountancy practice and I ran it for 27 odd years. And then 16 years ago, I started helping people sell their accountancy practice. It originally started really where somebody, um, a conference, asked me whether I would assist them in selling their accountancy practice in a town. They wanted to do it in a confidentiality way. They knew I knew a lot of accountants. And that's really how it started. The last 16 years, I've been assisting people in really selling their accountancy practices. And that's all I do.
Excellent, and that's what you've moved to as a full-time thing now,
As a
isn't it?
full time,
Yeah,
yes. I
yeah,
don't run an
absolutely.
accountancy practice now. I sold that years ago. And
Brilliant.
that's what I do. And I deal with every size of practice. The majority of my practice, to be fair, are small sole practitioners, small partnerships. And the most important thing, really, when selling an accountancy practice is help people look for the right buyer.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, look, I have mapped out just a few questions that I would like to ask you, Peter. But listen, the best questions are going to come from you guys running your own accountancy business right now, whether you're thinking about buying or thinking about selling. The questions that you ask are going to be the best. So, whatever those questions are that maybe you've been curious about for a while, start to put them in either in the chat box or in the Q&A. I'm happy to check both, and then I will reconvey that question across to Peter as well. So I will kick things off a little bit myself just by starting with the first question. So I'm just going to move my chat box and Q&A somewhere where I can see them and won't miss them. So they are now in my eye line. And look, let's start. I suppose I'll dive straight in there. How are accountancy firms being valued right now?
Yeah. Accountancy firms traditionally sell via gross recurring fees. So a gross recurring fee would be if you did a VAT return, say year-end accounts, um, PAYE, that would be classed as a gross recurring fee. One-off wouldn't be a gross recurring fee, a cash flow forecast, for instance. And accountancy firms currently sell for between 1 to 1.4 of the gross recurring fees. Practices are quite often sold with what's called clawback, which some of the people listening to this might have heard of. So clawback really is if any clients are lost in a given period. So if you sell your accountancy practice, let's say you're selling it over a period of time and payments over a period of time, it also depends on whether clients are lost during that period. So clawback tends to be a year. So if any clients are lost within that year. It did go slightly up to 18 months, the clawback during the sort of after the COVID period, but now it seems to have gone back to about a year. So that's why it's really, really important that, which I assist with is helping people find the right buyer, not any old buyer. It's important that the buyer fits the practice really, and it's the right buyer for the seller. I act for the seller, but it's the buyer's got to fit. It's got to be a good fit.
Brilliant, thank you. And you've just prompted another question, which I will ask a little bit later on, actually. So let me just dive in with my next question. I will just keep an eye on the chat box. My next question then is, just before we went live, you and I, Peter, were talking about the fact that the evolution of accountancy is moving more into that business advisory, business help, business support, rather than just back office crunching the numbers. Right now, are you seeing a difference in valuation between a compliance-only accountancy business and one that is offering those added value services in the form of advice, coaching, consultancy, whatever language you want to put to that? How are you seeing that at the moment?
I think that the accounts are offering advisory services is the clients are tending to stay with them. The market is at the moment is if people just want their accounts done, they can do it so cheaply abroad. So you've just got to give that extra bit of service really, rather than just here's your accounts. So the advisory service I think is important. because it shows consistency and the clients tend to stay with the accountants. And one question which is always asked is when somebody's buying an accountancy practice, how long has that client been with them? And if they've been with them years, then that does stand for a lot.
Okay. So I am just going to stay on that. I've got this question a little bit later, but I think it probably makes sense to ask it now. If you, as an accountant, are delivering more of an advisory service, then as a happy consequence of that, you've built up a much stronger relationship up with that client. Would that go against a potential buyer of accountancy business that actually the client had an even stronger relationship with the previous person and therefore don't necessarily buy into the new one?
Well, that's why it's important to get the right buyer, not any old buyer. And really, the secret is finding the buyer which suits how you think and how you run your practice. Accountancy practices are very, very popular. You know, I've got a practice at the moment we're selling in Kent, and it's turning over 200, 300 odd thousand, and we've had 60 people interested.
Wow.
So, but they're not all going to be the right buyer. It's a filtering process to find the right buyer. And what I encourage people to do is don't just look what's on paper, meet the people, have a selection of people you meet, and really choose the one that fits with your ethos, how you work. That's the most important thing.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. You talked about clawback earlier. What's the difference between the clawback and the earnout?
Right. Okay. So basically, clawback is obviously if the clients are lost. Earnout would pretend to be if somebody was buying based on the profit of the business, results rather. Certainly, what I'm coming across more really is the clawback, the year's clawback. Although some people will offer for your practice without any clawback, for instance. So obviously the risk there. But what you've got to remember is that both the buyer and the seller want the same thing. The buyer wants to pay the person selling their accountancy practice all their money because they want to continue with that client for years and have the money from that client for years. They don't want to lose that client. And the seller wants exactly the same thing because they want their money. So you both really want to achieve, and it's almost like a dating agency, really, I run. It's really getting the right fit.
A scenario that I've come across regarding clawbacks is that, and we've certainly experienced with this with a few people that we've been working with in the past. So an existing established accountancy business, they buy from a retiring accountant or whatever it might be. They buy their practice, and they've put this clawback in place. But then actually the buyer finds that their hands are tied because actually what they'd really like to do is raise the fees of these new clients, because actually compared to the fees that they're charging their existing clients, it's lower. However, the person sold says, no, you're not going to do anything to sabotage these clients, because if they walk away, I'm going to lose out. How would you kind of, handle
that's
that?
a very good question. Yeah. First of all, one of the most important things when I find the right buyer for somebody selling their accountancy practice is to make sure the fees match. There's no good selling an accountancy practice where maybe your average fee, I'm making up something here, it's £1,000 and the buyer's fee is £2,000. It's just not going to work. The number one thing that I think that sellers worry about really is the fees will suddenly go up. They'll lose a client. Also what you can do is what some people I've seen not do on other practices that has been sold, not through me, is they haven't put in the contract. It's the most important thing. Although I can't give legal advice, I always recommend that in the contract you always put that the fee does not change during the clawback period. So you've got an extra belt and braces One, you've checked that their fees match with you, and also you've got it in the contract that the fees don't change during that clawback period.
Okay, well, thank you for that. All right, so moving topic a little bit then. So from the point of view of maybe preparing your practice for selling for maximum value, what are the things that an accountant could or should maybe put in place in their practice to raise the value? You mentioned that it could be between 1 and 1.4 times GRF. Are there ways to exceed that even further?
Yeah, it's strange. I haven't personally ever seen one that's sold for more than 1.4. I think at the end of the day, it's a strange situation, because if you had 60 accountants after a house, for instance, it would raise the price of the house. But it seems that accountants aren't prepared to pay more than 1.4. I've never seen one go for more than 1.4. Not ones I've sold, but ones that have sold for other brokers or sold them themselves. Really, you've got to really get your practice that it's making at least a third in profit. So if you add back your director's salary, add back your pension, if you've got an expensive car, add that back. You'd really want to be earning a third of the profit. The other thing you've got to make sure really is that the practice runs on its own to some extent. So if you're running an accountancy practice where you never go on holiday, you're working 60 to 70 hours a week, that's not really going to attract a buyer.
No.
Really, what practices have got to do, they've got to learn to delegate. And it's the most difficult thing to do. You know, it's your baby. You want to do everything yourself. Unfortunately, you can't. You have to delegate. And if you're working those long hours, not going on holiday, it's not going to be as popular.
Yes, and I suppose because from a buyer's point of view, why would they take that headache on? Clients who have been effectively trained and educated to keep coming and bombarding just the partner, whereas actually, if you've got the mechanisms in place where your team can handle it, then yeah, you're just doing an exchange of
Yeah.
that business entity, aren't you, rather than something that relies on you.
Yes. I mean, generally, if you're turning over, a sole practitioner generally wouldn't be turning over more than about £200,000 to £300,000 a year, unless if they're turning over more than that, they either tend to be in a partnership, so they've got partners helping them run it, or they've got a good office manager.
Yeah.
But somebody trying to run it on their own to 200 to 300,000, they'll be working a lot of hours. They've got to get good staff when they're hitting the 300,000 bracket.
Okay. So what else might make an accountancy business an attractive proposition to a buyer? I know I'm talking a lot about buying at the moment, but what would make it attractive beyond the profit and obviously the less reliance on the owner? I can't speak. Are there other factors?
Yeah. Yeah, there are. I mean, times have changed. I mean, when I started doing this, 16, 17 years ago, it was very much that you were a accountancy practice in your town and you were going to sell to an accountancy practice in the town or the next town. So what people are, buyers are really, it doesn't really matter if they're 20 miles away, because they're doing a lot of this sort of accountancy, obviously the accountancy work, online. So that has changed. Also, what's changed is that people don't really want offices. Well, they want offices, but they want offices on a low lease, or they want offices on a license if they're taking an office. What they don't want is an office where they've signed a 10, 15-year lease and it's full repairing. They don't want that. And there are the odd few practices I come across, less, probably more recently, where they are. It tends to be a lot of the practices in London where they've signed a lease sort of, and it's got 10, 15 years to run. And, they've got lots of space left in their office because a lot of their staff have now gone to work from home. So that can be a problem. And it can be a case of really based on the deal that you negotiate on the lease, i.e. they pay towards the rent or they get less for the practice. But more often I'm finding that people are working from home. Quite often they're working from their shed, they're working from their garden, they're working from, office that they built, or they tend to be in licensed sort of, month by month, or they've got very short leases. So people don't want long leases, really.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, a question in the Q&A box that's just caught my eye. So from Oliver, I'm going to read it verbatim. You say working 60, 70 hours a week in the business is unattractive to a potential buyer, but is there a number of hours per week that buyers are generally okay with? Or is the expectation that it's 0 hours per week and the business can run itself? It's a really good.
No, I mean, if you're doing sort of 30, 40 hours a week, that's sort of, acceptable. It's just where you're trying to do absolutely everything. And I try to encourage people to contact me way before they're thinking of selling their accountancy practice, so that, have a free Zoom meeting with me so I can just give them some advice to see if they're going in the right direction. But generally, yeah, as I said before, if somebody's working sort of 60, 70 hours, it's not gonna work for a buyer, really. That's too many hours.
So it's inevitable that everybody who's on here, everybody in the world who runs their own accountancy business is going to have to exit that practice at some point.
Yes.
When should they start planning for that?
I would say they want to start really thinking about it, certainly 2 years. Have somebody look at it, like myself, like yourself, have a look at it, see if they're going in the right direction. Get the planning in place first. Don't leave it till 3 or 4 months till you're thinking of selling. Because it might be too late. I hate giving disappointing news by saying to somebody, listen, I can't sell your accountancy practice. Nobody's going to buy it because of this, and this. Good time to sell your accountancy practice while we're in that sort of frame is really any time from about February till about October. If somebody contacts me in October, November, I say, don't bother, because you're stuck into the tax return season, Christmas, meetings will get cancelled. So really think about selling your accountancy practice in about February, October time. I'd say Septemberish is the last time you want to really think about it, really. So plan for that.
So I get your response there regarding maybe at least 2 years for a sell. I suppose the immediate thought that came to my head is, what happens if the owner, the heavily relied on owner, gets hit by a bus, tomorrow, and a spouse, somebody else in the family needs to sell that business? I don't know if you'll have come across anything like that.
I have, unfortunately, I've come across that a few times where unfortunately somebody has passed away and I'm selling on behalf of a, wife and husband, where they know nothing about the business.
And
And
are there any kind of, if only they'd have got this in place, if only they'd have had this in place?
yeah, if only they'd had somebody in the background who could help them, really. Even if I understand if somebody's turning over, I sell practices where they're only turning over sort of 50,000 or 20,000 or 100,000, and they can't afford to have somebody. But it's important, really, that maybe they could have a deal with another accountant, that if anything happened to them, then they can get in touch with them. Just have a sort of a contact locally. Would
Yeah,
help.
there is a name for that, and I can't remember what it is.
I'm trying to think, yeah, I'm trying to think of it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know how compulsory it is across the different governing bodies that they have something like that in place either.
I'm not sure, to be honest. I mean, a lot of people I come across have got it in place. Certainly the ones which, are turning over up to 100,000, where they're sort of in a position where they're running it fine. They may be doing 20, 30 hours on their own. They don't need anybody. I do come across that where they have got together with somebody locally.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Well, I've had a few people in the chat box remind. It's called the alternative, and it is compulsory for ICAW. But whether it is for other people, yeah, other governing bodies, I'm not too sure. But yeah, thank you for that. Now then, let me just progress. So we know that there's this explosion now with AI. There's the threat that well, it's not just a threat, it's inevitable that the software businesses, Xero, QuickBooks, Sage, the list goes on, whether it's bookkeeping software, accounts production, payroll, they are all in a race to integrate AI into all of those packages, which is going to massively shortcut the production time. And I suspect as a consequence of that, there'll be many accountants out there that are singing from the rooftops, we can do your accounts for next to nothing. And the price for compliance is going to come down. So
Yeah.
with that in mind, how should a potential buyer and even seller be thinking about that? The average fee per client, how stable is that likely to be in the years to come?
Well, that comes back to what we spoke to before, really, adding that extra value, adding that advisory with it. You're not just there just to, here's a set of accounts, thank you very much. You're there as your accountant to advise them with tax saving sort of ideas, which really cannot be replaced in a way, because your everybody's circumstances are completely different. As an accountant, they might know your family circumstances, whether you can't sort of replace that with AI. So advisory service, I think, is going to become, as a bolt-on, is going to become popular, and that's important.
Okay. Thank you, by the way, everybody in the chat box for letting me know those things. So, yep, SEMA, ICAW, AIA, ACCA. So, I suppose, yes, it might be compulsory. I hope that everybody, therefore, does have an.
Let's do it. Yes. Yeah, I have to come across it. Yes.
Okay, brilliant. So, from a due diligence point of view, and I suppose there's a double barrel here. What kind of due diligence do you do when you're going to help somebody to sell their practice and likewise buy a practice? And what should the buyer be looking into themselves? What kind of level of due diligence should they be doing? And I suppose without planting words, I'm thinking, aging client base. If the partner's retiring, what's the average age and things like that. What are the kinds of things that should be looked out for?
I mean, certainly when I help people sell their accountancy practice, and somebody gives them an offer, basically they're given that offer subject to due diligence. So what tends to happen, because the reason for that really is that you cannot have, if you've got 10 buyers after accountancy practice, you cannot have every buyer go into a practice, 10 buyers, and start going through their records. That would just be impossible. It has to be, you have to give an offer first. So really what I always suggest is that accountants really almost do an Excel spreadsheet. Keep it simple. Name of client, trade they're in, service in your offering, age of client. Age hasn't become as interesting as so important, because so many people now working into their 80s and 90s, so whereas as before is sort of 65 we're getting out, so there's still a lot of people there who are working beyond the sort of retirement age. It's very important to get you to look when you're doing due diligence, is to follow a sort of audit procedure, really. Check the file, check the invoice from the client, check that it's coming in from the bank account. So you've almost got an audit trail for each particular client. So due diligence tends to happen after offer. I don't tend to get involved with the due diligence. They tend to visit the accountancy practice, sometimes obviously for obvious reasons. It's maybe after work, or it may be a weekend or something like that, where they go through the process of due diligence. But really, look for order, look for a trail.
Okay. Are there any kind of examples where somebody hasn't necessarily done the due diligence as well as they could have, that you've heard about, those scary stories that maybe we can learn from?
No, I mean, I do contact the seller and see how it's all gone, usually 6 months, 8 months after it's on. Unfortunately, touch wood, it's all gone well. There's sometimes they say, well, we lost 2 or 3 clients, but the thing is, That's natural.
Yeah.
You know, people die, people move away, that's natural, but no real reason really. And it comes down to really, getting a good fit, not just for the seller, the buyer. So it's a good match.
Okay. Brilliant. The clawback that you mentioned earlier, you said that, at one point after COVID, it was 18 months. It's closer to a year now. Does everybody insist on a clawback? Do different people want it to be different periods? What's your kind of view on that?
Yeah, I mean, quite often you'll get a buyer will make an offer for a practice, and they might give lots of different scenarios for that offer. So they might say, right, I'll give you this amount without clawback, this amount with clawback, this amount if I pay you over 2 years, 3 years, 1 year, one lump sum. So you can quite often get a buyer will give you lots of different scenarios. And it tends to be up to the seller. They're in the driving seat, what they want to go for. I act for some people who really just want to. I remember one particular couple, I sold their practice. They wanted to move to France. So they just wanted the money. Then they wanted to buy their place in France. And that was it. Obviously, they're going to get a bit less for that. And then some people think, well, actually, I don't mind waiting a couple of years because I'm going to get more for my practice. The money's sort of guaranteed. I'll stick to that. And also, what you also get when you're selling a practice, moving from the subject slightly, is you also get people that are selling their practice may want to work for the practice after the sale. And again, that's down to individual people. Some people want to hate accountancy and they want to run for the hills. And then some people say, well, actually, no, I just want to sort of slowly retire. I want to do it part-time. My always recommendations is that you stay with the practice to help with the handover, particularly with the clients who need their hand holding. So having run my own accountancy practice, I know that there's some clients that you'll never see. They send the records in, you maybe give them a little bit of advice, but you never really see them. But there's some clients that do need their hand holding, and you need to be there really just for that hand holding exercise. And when you sell your accountancy practice, you will get paid for that consultancy. So that's above the price. So as I say, some people might decide to stay on 1 day a week. Some people might stay on 6 months. Some people might just decide just to stay on, just to be called in for that hand holding. So a client contacts the new owner and they're there to sort of say, this is the new person, this is how he's going to help you. I always suggest that as a minimum.
Yeah, makes sense. And actually, you anticipated my next question, which was about that handover period and
yes, yeah,
whether you should, whether it benefits both buyer and seller to stay there.
I think it does. I think it does, but you don't have to. You don't have to do 6 months or a year in the practice full time if you don't want to. But just be there for those clients that need their hand holding.
Yeah. Okay, I've spotted a few things come up in both the chat box and the Q&A, so let me just go through those. So forgive me if I get the first come, first serve wrong, because I think the time is identical on all of them. So
Okay.
Brian then has said, if you have a good reputation and client, this may not be a question looking at it, if you have a good reputation and clients keep being referred, is there a way to get paid for the automatic rise in fees? It is a question, of course.
Automatic rise in fees. So basically what you're doing is that when you sell your accounting practice, you are predicting to the buyer how much you're going to invoice in the next year. So you're almost doing a prediction. So in that prediction is you would normally put up your fee 2-3%. Then you will get the money for that practice, definitely. It works also, let's say, for instance, if you're just going to sell your practice in a month's time and you sign up a client, but you've done no work for them, you will get the money for that client because the new owner will get it. So I always encourage the people that if they're thinking of selling, don't sort of wind down. If you see a new client, see the new client rather, get them to sign a engagement letter, then you will get paid for that when you sell your practice. even by doing no work at all, because the new owner will get that fee.
You've just, sorry, I know there's a couple of more questions on there, which I will come on to. But you've just mentioned this winding down. I speak to a lot of people that say, I'm not, I don't think I'll sell my practice. I'll just gradually wind it down. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's a shame, really, because if they're gradually going to wind it down, because they could get great value for their practice. They could, if you're selling, practice turning over 200, you're talking about throwing away 250, possibly £250,000. So yeah, I do come across that. Oh, I'll slowly wind it down, but there is value in your practice, huge amount of value. And at the moment, they're popular.
Cool. All right, let me ask my next one then, Caroline. Are there ever occasions now? Oops, it's all right, because another question came in, it just made it jump off my screen. Are there ever occasions now where the seller gets the reverse, more when fees went up in the first 12 to 24 months? So I don't get that question. Does that make sense to you, or?
Really, I mean, as I said before, if you normally would put up your fees, you are predicting when you sell your accountancy practice how much you're going to get in the next year. That would also include it going up 2%. So that would be within it. Yeah.
I see. Okay, another question. I'm guessing this isn't necessarily the name of the person, but it's from Plus. So in simple terms, the maximum is 1.5 times the gross income.
Yeah.
1.4.
Yeah.
It actually says 1.4. Why I said 5, I don't know.
All right, it's okay.
The gross income, not net income from the client. Also, would that include if an accountancy practice have received a new client? I think you've perhaps just answered that.
Would.
Anyway,
if they're going to get that fee in a year's time from signing up, they're going to get that.
Yeah. Another one from Caroline. If clients pay by direct debit ahead of the work, then that needs to be taken off the fees when you receive for the practice, as you have received the money, but new practice will do the work.
Yes. Yeah, it would. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Harish, I bought an accountancy practice in 2018 with 100K of GRF. And there were so many low value clients, like they pay £100 per annum for tax returns. We couldn't get rid of them to avoid the knock-on effect, as most of the clients are friends of one another. How can we deal with such practice purchases? Any advice would be appreciated, especially around if we get rid of them and adjust in clawback.
Well, all I could say for that is you must have known that when you bought it. There's no.
I think that's the case, isn't it? Yeah.
So,
yeah.
You would have got, hopefully, when somebody have sold that accountancy practice to you, they've given you an Excel spreadsheet with Mr. Smith, this is how much you're going to get from him. So it shouldn't sort of be a surprise.
Yeah, it's the importance of the due diligence, isn't it?
Due diligence, yeah. Well, going back to the due diligence, one thing I didn't say is that regarding due diligence, when people do it, is that accountancy practices are sold in two ways. One way, they buy the limited company.
Yeah.
Second way is they buy the goodwill. So people say to me, well, which is it? What's the most popular? Well, to be honest, there isn't really. Some are limited, some are goodwill. When somebody is carrying out due diligence, they're going to be more stringent buying a limited company, because they don't know, they've got to make sure that the company has paid their VAT, paid their PAYE, whereas goodwill, you're just buying pure goodwill. Advantage of selling a limited company. Obviously, you've got entrepreneurs relief, which isn't as good as it was, but you've got that. You're selling the shares. So that's good for the seller, maybe not as good for the buyer, because they can't get rid of that until they actually sell the practice themselves or sell on. But also, I think with selling a limited company, it's more popular now that people are being paid by the client by direct debit and standing order. It's more seamless if you sell the limited company, because you're not writing to the client, say, hey, I'm here. I want you to sign a new direct debit, sign a new standing order, whatever it might be. So with a limited company, you're just changing over directorships. and it's more seamless. So that's the two differences.
Makes sense. Okay, let me just have a quick look. So I've got a feeling some of my remaining questions may well have been answered, although I have, in fact, I'll tell you what, let me just ask the one from Oliver again here. So you mentioned that profit before tax with directors' remuneration added back should be a third of revenue. How would, for example, 25% profit rather than a third impact on valuation? Yeah.
Well, it would be, it would be, people wouldn't be that interested in that, to be honest. They wouldn't get the interest. I'm not saying you wouldn't be able to sell it, but if you're only making 25% profit, it's not very good at all. I would, if somebody contacted me and told me that, I would say they've got to do some work. There's something wrong there. Maybe their staff levels are too high, or there's something that's either not charging enough, staff levels are too high, or they're bleeding money somewhere.
So if somebody approached you and you took a look and basically, that the firm owner is working 60 plus hours a week. They are in that kind of range that Oliver's just mentioned in terms of profitability. There's a lot reliant on that business owner. They've got a team, but actually all the clients come to them. The team keep coming to them for advice. They've not got any kind of standing operating procedures in place. The list could go on, really. What would your advice be to them?
Well, I'll be honest with them. They're not going to sell their accountancy practice. So my advice would be come along and see somebody like you. And to be honest, I don't give training, but I can certainly, if somebody contacts me and, we have a very, very confidentiality chat on Zoom, and it would be totally in confidence. Once we've had a chat, I've seen some of the figures, I would give my recommendations. Some might involve just a small fix.
Yeah.
Small, but some might involve a larger fix over a length of time. But sometimes you do find that, and some people I speak to, I spoke to 2 years ago, and they say, hey, remember me, did what you told me to do. I've turned it around. Here it is. And we sell it. But it's all encouraging people really to contact me totally free. And, I'll have a look at it. I'll spend half an hour chatting to them, seeing what they've got, and then giving them that advice, whether they've got a practice which is going to sell or not. Because if somebody's, I think it's worth it for anybody to do that, to have the security that, because some people are relying on selling their practice as their pension.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's you probably look at your pension now and again to see, how much that's worth and whether you're going to have enough to retire. Why not do it with your accountancy practice? In some instances, it could be worth more than your pension, more than your house.
Yeah. I have another question come up from Keith. By the way, I hope you're well, Keith. Not seen you for a while. So, Peter, why is the selling price based on a multiple of turnover rather than profit? When most non-accounting businesses sell, it is based on a multiple of EBITDA.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's just traditionally how practices have always been sold, not just how I sell accountancy practice. They're always sold with gross recurring fees. I think that dentists are sold in the same manner, I believe, and vets are sold in the same manner with this gross recurring fees. I've never sold one, but I think they are. So it's just how it's traditionally been done. And I don't know why.
I think from my experience, by the way, I think the larger the firm, when it starts to go into the 7 and 8 figures, it starts to switch to an EBITDA calculation.
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah.
That's for sure. But it is.
But in the larger practices, what tends to happen is, it tends to be a mixture of partners staying and some leaving, and that sort of thing. So it does slightly change.
Absolutely. Okay. Daniel has asked, what size of practice would I think we just asked this question at the same time. Forgive me, Daniel. I think I probably simultaneously said this. So, and I don't know as we know the answer. So, what size of practice would a valuation be based on GRF, and what size would the valuation be based on EBITDA? And I think the answer was
yeah.
I suppose there are lots of factors involved as well in that one, aren't there? But it tends to be when it gets to the really large
ones. Yeah.
All right. I glancing down the rest of my questions, I think we've answered them. So if I can just give a recommendation to the people listening right now, I don't think it matters when you are thinking about selling that business, because you could get hit by a bus. And actually, why be in a position where you wait until you want to retire before you get your accountancy business into a position where it's less reliant on you, that you're working less hours, and why wait till you retire and sell
Yeah,
to get the lifestyle you want? So
absolutely.
actually, if I can strongly recommend, Peter's just said he's doing these free phone calls. He'll give you some input, some advice. He'll ask you a few questions about your business. Why don't you take him up on that? Why don't we just put your email address in the chat box right now, Peter? If you like, I can perhaps grab that, although I did have it in front of me and I've lost it, but it wouldn't take me a moment. Is the best option for them to email you or visit your site, by the way, and book a call?
Just email me, visit the site, whatever it is. I will then send them a link to my diary, and they can book in on my diary, and we can arrange a Zoom meeting.
Absolutely spot on. Okay, well, in that case, I can paste that in now.
Okay.
All right. So my recommendation is copy that at the very least, so that when this session finishes, you've not lost it. Make a copy of that email address, and look, I don't think you've anything to lose by contacting Peter and just having a conversation. Yeah, why not? So, any closing remarks, Peter?
As I've said throughout the meeting, really contact me sooner rather than later, really, because at some stage you're going to sell your accountancy practice. It's inevitable, but do it early. Get in contact with me early if you're not thinking of selling it at the moment.
Absolutely. And by the way, if somebody's thinking about buying, also, it would be useful for them to know you, wouldn't it? Because you
absolutely contact me. I've got a buyer's register, and it's the ones that are really on the buyer's register, really, who I contact when an accountancy practice becomes available in their area. So yeah, buyers contact me. I will register them, and as soon as one comes in their area with their criteria, I'll let them know.
Fantastic. Peter, you have an obedient dog in your back. I know I've been seeing him walking.
He's exhausted.
Left to right. Oh, he's there now. He's left out. Yeah, absolutely. Spot on. Well, listen, everybody, please do join me in thanking Peter. You've been really, it's been so informative, really, really useful. I've asked you loads of questions, thrown them at you. You've answered them really, really well. So thank you from me.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting.
Hopefully, from the audience point of view, lots of thanks coming in now into the chat box. Very much appreciate that. Remember, if you haven't made a copy of that email address, definitely do it now. Get in touch with Peter, and we will see you next week. I hope you have a fantastic rest of the week, or an amazing weekend. And by the way, you've got me in next week's webinar as well. So I look forward to seeing you again then. All the best, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.